The Pacific skies of World War II were more than just empty air. They were a brutal arena, a stage set for deadly duels where empires clashed, where strategy and engineering met courage and sacrifice. By 1942, the Empire of Japan held the advantage, their nimble Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters carving through the clouds with unmatched agility. They were fast, light, and deadly, and they ruled the air over the Pacific with terrifying dominance. American pilots flying outdated and underpowered aircraft often found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. Dogfights that began with hope frequently ended in flames, smoke, and heartbreak. The United States Navy faced a crisis. Without air superiority, the island-hopping campaigns, the carrier battles, the very future of the Pacific War would hang in the balance. It was clear that a new weapon was needed, not just another airplane, but a machine purpose-built to win the skies back. It had to be tough enough to survive fierce combat, powerful enough to outperform the Zero, and simple enough for a new generation of pilots, many of whom would have barely a handful of flight hours before facing life-or-death combat. That weapon would come in the form of a new fighter, the Grumman F6F Hellcat. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't the fastest or the most glamorous, but it was rugged, lethal, and built for one purpose: to turn the tide of the air war in the Pacific. The story of the Hellcat is as much about human ingenuity as it is about hardware. At Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, engineers and designers worked under relentless pressure. The lessons learned from the earlier F4F Wildcat, a brave but often outclassed fighter, were fresh in their minds. They knew exactly where the Wildcat had fallen short. They knew what the pilots needed, and they knew that time was not on their side. In less than a year, they would design, build, and test an entirely new aircraft, one that would go from drawing board to combat deployment faster than almost any fighter before it. The design philosophy was brutally simple: build it strong, build it reliable, build it deadly. Every line of the Hellcat's frame reflected this thinking. Its broad, powerful wings were designed to generate lift at slower speeds, crucial for carrier takeoffs and landings. Its heavy-duty landing gear could absorb the punishing impacts of deck landings on pitching aircraft carriers. The cockpit offered excellent visibility, a vital advantage in dogfights where seeing the enemy first could mean living to fight another day. Even the cockpit layout was built with the pilot in mind, intuitive and efficient, so that in the chaos of battle, a pilot's focus could remain on fighting, not fumbling with controls. At the heart of the Hellcat lay its most potent weapon, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, a 2,000-horsepower powerhouse that transformed the aircraft into a predator. With a top speed of over 380 miles per hour, the Hellcat could now match or exceed the performance of the Zero. But speed alone wasn't enough. The Hellcat needed to hit hard. It carried 650 caliber Browning machine guns, a devastating wall of fire that could shred enemy fighters and bombers alike. These guns, combined with robust ammunition storage and precise targeting systems, meant that a single burst from a Hellcat could end a dogfight in seconds. And then there was its resilience. Pilots often said the Hellcat could take a beating and bring you home. Its self-sealing fuel tanks reduced the risk of catastrophic fires, while armor plating around the cockpit and vital components gave pilots a fighting chance even after taking enemy fire. This toughness wasn't just an engineering choice. It was a psychological one. Pilots knew they were flying a machine that could endure the worst and still get them back to the carrier. That confidence, multiplied across squadrons, translated into aggressive, fearless combat tactics. Range was another critical factor. The Pacific theater wasn't Europe. Battles weren't fought over fields and towns just a few miles apart. Missions could stretch hundreds of miles over open ocean, often with no friendly base in sight. The Hellcat's extended range, roughly 1,000 miles with drop tanks, allowed it to escort bombers deep into enemy territory, strike distant targets, and still return safely. This reach made it an indispensable tool in the island-hopping campaign, where projecting air power across vast distances was key to victory. But perhaps the Hellcat's most important quality was its forgiving nature. Unlike many high-performance fighters that required expert hands, the Hellcat was remarkably easy to fly. Its stability and smooth handling meant that even rookie pilots, many of them fresh from flight school with minimal experience, could climb into the cockpit and stand a real chance against seasoned Japanese veterans. This was a game-changer. America's industrial might could build thousands of planes, but its pilot training pipeline was still catching up to wartime demands. The Hellcat bridged that gap, turning raw recruits into effective combat pilots almost overnight. When the Hellcat entered service in 1943, it didn't just join the war, it changed it. Its first combat missions in August of that year were a revelation. Pilots who had once dreaded encounters with the Zero now found themselves outclimbing, outgunning, and outlasting their adversaries. Word spread quickly across the Pacific. The days of Japanese air supremacy were numbered. By the end of its first year in service, the Hellcat had already racked up an astonishing kill ratio. 19 enemy aircraft shot down for every Hellcat lost in aerial combat. This wasn't just impressive, it was unprecedented. The tide of the air war had turned. The Hellcat didn't just dominate, it created legends. More than 300 U.S. Navy pilots became aces flying the Hellcat, each credited with 5 or more aerial victories. It was a plane that made heroes out of ordinary men, a machine that amplified skill and rewarded courage. And nowhere was this dominance more evident than in the pivotal battles of 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot for a reason. On June 19th and 20th, Hellcat pilots faced wave after wave of Japanese aircraft and annihilated them. In just 2 days, they shot down more than 300 enemy planes, crippling Japan's carrier air power and forever altering the balance of the Pacific War. The Hellcat's combination of speed, firepower, and durability proved unmatched, and from that point on, the skies belonged to the Allies. The victory at the Philippine Sea was more than just a tactical win. It was a symbol of how far the U.S. Navy had come since the dark days of 1942. 2 years earlier, Japanese pilots had been the terror of the skies, feared for their unmatched dogfighting skills and the dominance of their Zero fighters. Now, they were being hunted. The Hellcat was not just matching them, it was destroying them in staggering numbers. And the psychological shift this created cannot be overstated. For the first time, Japanese pilots entered combat knowing they were outmatched. They faced an enemy fighter that could dive faster, climb stronger, and take punishment that would have shattered a Zero to pieces. Morale began to crack. Confidence wavered, and with each engagement, the once feared Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service grew weaker. But the Hellcat's contribution didn't end with dogfighting. Its versatility made it a multi-role powerhouse, far more than just a fighter. As the Allies pushed westward across the Pacific, air power needed to be flexible. Some missions required high-speed interception, others needed precise bombing runs against ground targets or ship formations. The Hellcat excelled at all of them. Equipped with bombs or rockets, it became a formidable fighter-bomber capable of smashing enemy installations, strafing ground troops, or crippling ships in harbor. Its robust frame and powerful engine made it the ideal platform for these missions, giving the Navy an adaptable tool that could shift roles without compromising effectiveness. One of the most impressive variants was the night fighter version, the F6F5N. Outfitted with radar, this Hellcat hunted enemy aircraft in darkness, intercepting bombers and reconnaissance planes under the cover of night. This technological leap gave the Allies yet another edge, denying the Japanese any hope of regaining control through surprise nocturnal raids. The Hellcat's ability to adapt to new technologies and mission profiles was a testament to its design. It wasn't just built for 1943, it was built to evolve with the war. By late 1944, the Hellcat was present at every major naval engagement in the Pacific. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, it played a crucial role in establishing air dominance and protecting Allied fleets from kamikaze attacks and conventional airstrikes. The Hellcat's presence meant that American carriers could operate with far greater confidence. Their decks teemed with fighters that could meet and destroy any aerial threat long before it reached the fleet. This aerial shield allowed the U.S. Navy to unleash its full striking power, carrier-based bombers and torpedo planes that devastated Japanese ships and support lines. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of the Hellcat's success was the speed and scale of its production. Grumman's factories worked around the clock, turning out aircraft at a rate that seemed almost impossible. By the end of the war, more than 12,000 Hellcats had been built, a staggering number that ensured the skies remained firmly in Allied hands. This production miracle reflected not only America's industrial strength, but also the Hellcat's straightforward design. It was engineered for mass production without sacrificing performance or reliability, a crucial factor in sustaining the war effort as pilot losses mounted and aircraft demands soared. The Hellcat also transformed the very nature of carrier warfare. Before its arrival, aircraft carriers had been vulnerable. Japanese air power could strike quickly and decisively, sometimes before American defenses had time to react. The Hellcat changed that equation. Its superior range and speed allowed U.S. carriers to project power further and respond faster. Carrier task forces became mobile fortresses, capable of launching devastating air assaults and defending themselves against counterattacks. This shift turned the tide of naval warfare and cemented the aircraft carrier's status as the dominant capital ship of the era, a role it still holds to this day. The psychological impact of the Hellcat extended far beyond the battlefield. Japanese pilots began referring to coordinated attacks by groups of Hellcats as the Hellcat trap, a deadly tactic where American fighters would lure enemy planes into engagements they couldn't win. Japanese commanders were forced to adapt their strategies, often avoiding direct confrontation whenever possible. This shift in behavior was telling. The hunter had become the hunted. And as Japan's pool of experienced pilots dwindled, replaced by hastily trained rookies, the imbalance grew even more pronounced. The Hellcat, forgiving and easy to fly, was perfectly suited to its own inexperienced pilots. But for Japan, the training gap was insurmountable. Inexperienced Zero pilots stood almost no chance against veteran Hellcat squadrons. Even so, the Hellcat's success wasn't just about the machine, it was also about the men who flew it. Pilots like David McCampbell, the U.S. Navy's top ace of the war, achieved legendary status in the Hellcat. McCampbell scored 34 aerial victories, including an incredible 9 kills, in a single mission during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Stories like his became symbols of American air power, inspiring confidence on the home front and fear among the enemy. These pilots, many of them barely out of their teens, trusted the Hellcat with their lives. And time and again, it delivered. By 1945, the Hellcat's dominance was absolute. The once mighty Japanese air forces were shattered, their aircraft outdated, and their pilots inexperienced. U.S. carrier groups roamed the Pacific virtually unchallenged, striking at will from Iwo Jima to Okinawa and beyond. Even as Japan turned to desperate tactics like kamikaze attacks, the Hellcat remained a critical line of defense. Its speed and firepower allowed it to intercept suicide planes before they reached their targets, saving countless lives and ships in the final brutal months of the war. When the war finally ended, the numbers spoke for themselves. The Hellcat had destroyed more than 5,200 enemy aircraft, more than any other Allied naval fighter. It had achieved a kill ratio of 19-1, a record that remains one of the most impressive in aviation history. It had produced more aces, flown more missions, and changed the course of more battles than any other aircraft in the Pacific theater. And perhaps most remarkably, it had done all of this while being simple enough for rookie pilots and rugged enough to survive even the fiercest battles. Yet for all its achievements, the Hellcat never became a household name like the Spitfire or the Mustang. It was a workhorse, not a showpiece, a machine built to do a job and do it without fanfare. But among those who flew it, maintained it, and relied on it, the Hellcat was more than just a fighter plane. It was a trusted ally, a shield, a sword, and a symbol of hope in some of the darkest days of the war. Its very existence was proof that with ingenuity, determination, and industrial might, even the most daunting challenges could be overcome. As the Hellcat carved its legend across the skies of the Pacific, its influence extended far beyond the battlefield. It wasn't just reshaping aerial tactics, it was reshaping strategy itself. Before its arrival, naval operations were constrained by the limits of their air cover. Carriers had to stay within relatively close range of their objectives, fearful of being overwhelmed by enemy aircraft. But now, with Hellcats patrolling the skies, those same carriers could operate deeper into hostile territory, knowing they had the upper hand. The Hellcat's range and endurance allowed them to project power across vast distances, giving Allied commanders a new kind of flexibility. Island assaults, once perilous and uncertain, could now be launched with overwhelming air support. Bombing raids could be escorted far beyond the reach of the old Wildcat or Dauntless. The Pacific was opening up and the Hellcat was leading the charge. The impact was particularly profound during the island-hopping campaigns of 1944 and 1945. At places like Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, Hellcats flew relentless sorties, clearing the skies of enemy fighters, strafing defensive positions, and supporting ground troops as they fought their way inland. They weren't just fighting other planes, they were shaping the course of amphibious invasions, softening up defenses and ensuring that U.S. Marines and soldiers could advance with the skies firmly under American control. On the ground, troops often looked up with a sense of reassurance when they heard the deep, powerful roar of Hellcat engines overhead. That sound meant the enemy's planes were gone, their supply lines were being shredded, and their positions were under constant attack. One of the Hellcat's greatest strengths was how seamlessly it integrated with the evolving doctrine of carrier warfare. By 1944, carrier task forces were no longer just strike platforms. They were mobile, self-sufficient ecosystems capable of launching massive, coordinated air operations. Hellcats flew combat air patrols to shield the fleet, fighter sweeps to clear enemy airspace, and escort missions for dive bombers and torpedo planes. They attacked ground targets, scouted ahead for enemy fleets, and intercepted incoming bombers. They were, in every sense, the backbone of carrier aviation. Without them, the carriers themselves would have been vulnerable. With them, they were nearly untouchable. The dominance of the Hellcat also exposed the limitations of the Japanese Zero. Once considered the pinnacle of fighter design, the Zero had been built for a very different kind of war, one where range and maneuverability were valued over armor and firepower. At the beginning of the conflict, this made perfect sense. Japan's early war doctrine emphasized long-range operations over vast stretches of ocean, and the Zero excelled at dogfighting against lightly armed opponents. But as the war dragged on, the weaknesses of that philosophy became painfully clear. The Zero's lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks made it vulnerable to the Hellcat's heavy guns. Its lightweight structure couldn't absorb the same punishment. And as Allied pilots learned new tactics, using their superior speed and diving ability to dictate the terms of engagement, the Zero's agility advantage became less and less relevant. In many ways, the Hellcat was the embodiment of America's approach to warfare in World War II. It was not the most elegant solution, nor the most technologically advanced, but it was practical, powerful, and produced in overwhelming numbers. Where the Zero had been handcrafted in relatively small batches, the Hellcat rolled off assembly lines in the thousands. Where Japanese pilots spent years honing their skills before deployment, American pilots received intensive but brief training and were quickly sent into combat, confident that their aircraft would give them a fighting chance. This industrial, large-scale approach was the foundation of Allied victory, and the Hellcat was one of its most visible and effective manifestations. The psychological aspect of air dominance cannot be overstated either. By late 1944, Japanese air units were no longer launching offensives. They were reacting. The once feared Zero fighters often refused to engage unless they had a numerical advantage, and even then, their chances of survival were slim. Entire squadrons were wiped out in single engagements. The shift in momentum was so complete that many Japanese pilots were reassigned to kamikaze units, a desperate tactic born of hopelessness. Against the Hellcat, traditional dogfighting was a losing proposition, but the Hellcat's legacy was not only measured by its combat record or kill counts, though those were staggering. It was also measured by the opportunities it created. With air superiority secured, the United States could focus on offensive operations without constantly fearing enemy air attacks. Strategic bombing campaigns against the Japanese mainland became more feasible. Naval invasions could proceed with air cover guaranteed. And perhaps most importantly, the morale of Allied forces soared. Pilots no longer climbed into the cockpit wondering if they would come back. They knew they were flying one of the most capable and survivable aircraft of the war. The confidence extended beyond the pilots themselves. Maintenance crews praised the Hellcat for its ease of repair and reliability. In the harsh, humid conditions of the Pacific, where salt air corroded metal and tropical storms battered equipment, the Hellcat held up remarkably well. Its straightforward design meant that damaged aircraft could often be repaired and returned to service in days, not weeks. Spare parts were readily available thanks to standardized production, and ground crews quickly became experts at keeping the fleet airworthy. This logistical reliability was an often overlooked but critical part of the Hellcat's success. Wars are not won by battles alone. They are won by the ability to sustain those battles day after day, month after month. And the Hellcat made that possible. It also became a bridge between generations of aviation technology. The lessons learned from its design would shape the next wave of American fighters, influencing everything from cockpit ergonomics to armament philosophy. Engineers studying the Hellcat's combat performance drew valuable insights into what made a successful carrier-based fighter, insights that would carry forward into the jet age. Even as piston-engine fighters gave way to swept-wing jets in the years following World War II, the principles behind the Hellcat's success, durability, firepower, simplicity, and versatility, remained cornerstones of aircraft design. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, the Hellcat had more than earned its place in history. It had flown nearly 70% of all combat missions by carrier-based fighters in the Pacific. It had helped sink ships, destroy airfields, cripple supply lines, and annihilate enemy squadrons. It had turned the tide in the air and, by extension, on the sea and on the ground. And yet, when the guns fell silent, the Hellcat did not fade into obscurity. Many remained in service for years, used by the U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and even several foreign air forces. Their reliability and effectiveness ensured they had a long life even after the war had ended. Even after the war ended, the legacy of the Hellcat continued to grow, both in the skies and in the collective memory of those who had lived through the conflict. For the pilots who flew it, the Hellcat was more than a machine. It was a partner, a protector, and in many cases, a lifesaver. Veterans often spoke with deep affection about the aircraft, describing it as a fighter that forgave mistakes and always had your back. In an era when a single wrong maneuver could mean the difference between life and death, that kind of dependability was priceless. It created a bond between man and machine that transcended its metal frame and roaring engine. Pilots trusted their Hellcats implicitly, and that trust was repaid thousands of times over. The human stories behind the Hellcat are as compelling as the aircraft's technical achievements. Many young men who took to the skies in the F6F had never imagined themselves as warriors. They were farm boys, factory workers, college students, ordinary Americans thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Yet in the cockpit of a Hellcat, they became something more. They were guardians of the fleet, hunters of the enemy, and participants in a massive struggle that would shape the course of history. The aircraft gave them confidence, strength, and the tools they needed to prevail. It turned fear into determination and transformed inexperience into deadly skill. One of the most striking aspects of the Hellcat's story is how it changed the very nature of pilot training. Before the Hellcat, American naval aviators had to master difficult and often unforgiving aircraft with steep learning curves and little margin for error. Many trainees washed out, unable to handle the complex demands of carrier landings or aerial combat maneuvers. But the Hellcat's forgiving flight characteristics opened the door for a much broader range of pilots. It was stable, responsive, and predictable, allowing new pilots to focus on tactics rather than wrestling with the machine. This dramatically increased the number of aviators the Navy could deploy and ensured a steady flow of fresh pilots to the front lines, a crucial advantage in a long and grueling conflict. The design choices that made the Hellcat easy to fly also contributed to its combat effectiveness. Its wide wings and powerful engine provided excellent lift and control, even at lower speeds. This allowed pilots to maintain an edge in dogfights, staying on the tail of enemy aircraft without stalling or losing maneuverability. The cockpit's clear visibility gave them situational awareness that could mean the difference between spotting an ambush or falling victim to one. And the combination of firepower and durability gave them the confidence to press attacks aggressively, knowing their aircraft could deliver devastating blows and still bring them home even after taking hits. Another factor in the Hellcat's sustained dominance was its ability to adapt to evolving combat conditions. As Japanese tactics changed, so too did the way Hellcats were used. Early in the war, much of their focus was on air-to-air combat, clearing the skies of enemy fighters and securing air superiority. But as Japan's air strength waned, the Hellcat took on more ground attack missions, strafing enemy positions, bombing supply depots, and providing close air support for advancing troops. It even participated in anti-shipping strikes, using rockets and bombs to sink transports, destroyers, and other vessels critical to Japan's supply chains. The aircraft's versatility meant that it remained relevant and effective even as the strategic priorities of the war shifted. The psychological dimension of the Hellcat's dominance was also deeply significant. As Japanese pilots grew more desperate, many turned to kamikaze tactics, suicide attacks meant to inflict maximum damage on Allied ships. These missions were terrifying and difficult to stop, but the Hellcat played a crucial role in defending against them. Its speed, climb rate, and firepower made it ideal for intercepting kamikaze planes before they could reach their targets. Countless ships and sailors were saved by Hellcat pilots who intercepted attackers miles from the fleet, shooting them down in dramatic, high-stakes battles that often unfolded just minutes before impact. In this way, the Hellcat became not just a weapon of offense, but a shield against one of the most desperate and devastating strategies of the war. By 1945, the Hellcat was not just a fighter, it was a symbol. Its silhouette, with its broad wings and rugged frame, came to represent American naval power itself. To enemy pilots, it was a harbinger of defeat. To Allied sailors and soldiers, it was a promise of protection. And to the people back home, it was a testament to what American industry and ingenuity could achieve under pressure. Newspaper articles and war bond posters often featured the Hellcat, celebrating its achievements and reminding citizens that their efforts on the home front, in factories, shipyards, and training fields, were directly contributing to victory. The aircraft's post-war career further cemented its reputation. Many Hellcats continued to serve with the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps in the years immediately following the conflict, often in training roles or as test platforms for new technologies. Some were exported to Allied nations, where they continued to fly well into the late 1940s and early 1950s. A handful even saw combat again during smaller conflicts and regional skirmishes, proving that their design remained relevant long after the Second World War had ended. Their ruggedness and reliability made them ideal for these secondary roles, and their legacy continued to grow with each passing year. One particularly notable chapter in the Hellcat's post-war life was its involvement in experimental aviation programs. Engineers used surplus Hellcats to test new radar systems, jet-assisted takeoff technology, and even early guided missile concepts. These experiments laid the groundwork for the next generation of carrier aircraft and helped transition naval aviation into the jet age. In this way, the Hellcat's influence extended far beyond its own era, shaping the development of aircraft that would dominate the skies in the Korean War, the Cold War, and beyond. Even as newer, faster, and more advanced fighters took to the skies, the Hellcat's place in history remained secure. It had accomplished something truly extraordinary, not just contributing to victory, but defining the very nature of that victory. It had turned the tide of war in one of the most challenging theaters, and it had done so not through gimmicks or luck, but through superior design, overwhelming production, and the skill and bravery of the men who flew it. The lessons it taught about the balance of speed and durability, the importance of adaptability, and the power of industrial might remain relevant even in the age of supersonic jets and stealth fighters. As the Hellcat's legend continued to grow, historians, engineers, and military strategists began to study it not just as a weapon of war, but as a case study in how the right combination of design, timing, and doctrine can alter the course of history. The Hellcat was not a product of chance. It was the result of deliberate choices, each rooted in a clear understanding of what the war demanded. And perhaps its greatest strength was that it was not over-engineered. It didn't chase experimental technologies or untested ideas. Instead, it was built around proven principles: power, simplicity, and survivability. These priorities may seem obvious in hindsight, but during the chaotic rush of wartime development, they were revolutionary. Consider the alternative path. Many nations poured resources into creating high-performance aircraft that, while impressive on paper, were too complex, too fragile, or too expensive to produce in sufficient numbers. Germany's Me-262 jet fighter, for example, was far more advanced than the Hellcat, but it arrived too late, was plagued by maintenance issues, and could never be fielded in the numbers needed to change the outcome of the war. Japan, meanwhile, struggled to replace the Zero with a more capable successor, hampered by shortages of materials and the inability to produce enough aircraft to match the Allied industrial machine. The Hellcat, by contrast, struck a perfect balance, advanced enough to dominate the enemy, but simple enough to be produced by the thousands and flown by pilots with limited training. This balance extended to its armament as well. The decision to equip the Hellcat with 650 caliber Browning machine guns may have seemed conservative compared to some aircraft that carried cannons or mixed weapon systems, but it proved devastatingly effective. The Brownings were reliable, accurate, and capable of delivering a dense stream of fire that could tear through aircraft and lightly armored ground targets alike. They also allowed pilots to stay on target longer and with greater precision. Many Japanese aircraft designed with agility over protection in mind simply disintegrated under the Hellcat's concentrated bursts. And even when facing more heavily built bombers, the volume of fire was enough to cripple engines, destroy control surfaces, or detonate fuel tanks with deadly efficiency. The philosophy of reliability permeated every aspect of the Hellcat's construction. Grumman engineers often joked that their aircraft were built like ironworks, a nod to the company's nickname, the Grumman Iron Works. It wasn't far from the truth. The Hellcat was rugged to a degree that astonished even its pilots. Many returned from missions with bullet holes stitched across their wings, control cables shredded, or oil leaking from damaged engines, and yet they made it back to their carriers. There are countless accounts of Hellcats landing safely with one wing nearly severed, with landing gear jammed, or with fuel tanks riddled with holes. Each story reinforced the same point. This was a plane designed not just to fight, but to survive. The emphasis on durability also had strategic implications. Every aircraft that returned to base could be repaired and flown again. Every pilot who survived a mission could fight another day, bringing with them valuable combat experience that could be passed on to new recruits. This cumulative effect cannot be overstated. Japan, by contrast, often lost both pilots and aircraft in engagements, eroding its pool of experienced aviators and leaving its air units increasingly dependent on inexperienced replacements. The Hellcat didn't just win battles, it sustained a campaign, grinding down the enemy's capacity to resist over time. It's also worth noting how much the Hellcat's success relied on cooperation between different branches of the military and the industrial sector. Grumman worked closely with the Navy throughout the design and production process, incorporating pilot feedback and making rapid adjustments based on combat reports. Changes that might have taken months or years in peacetime were implemented in weeks. If pilots reported issues with visibility, adjustments were made. If combat data suggested changes to the armor layout, production lines adapted. This close collaboration ensured that the Hellcat remained a living, evolving weapon, one that could respond to the realities of war rather than being trapped by its original blueprint. Another factor that often goes underappreciated is the role of logistics in the Hellcat's effectiveness. War is as much about supply chains as it is about battles, and the ability to deliver spare parts, fuel, ammunition, and replacement aircraft to remote Pacific bases was a logistical challenge of enormous proportions. The Hellcat's design made this easier. Standardized components, modular construction, and straightforward maintenance requirements meant that parts could be swapped out quickly, and repairs could be performed with minimal specialized equipment. This logistical efficiency ensured that the Hellcat fleets remained combat-ready even in the most remote corners of the Pacific, often under conditions that would have grounded less robust aircraft. The Hellcat's overwhelming success also had a profound effect on Allied strategy as the war drew to a close. With air superiority secured, planners could contemplate operations that would have been unthinkable in 1942. Long-range bombing campaigns against the Japanese mainland, amphibious assaults on heavily defended islands, and massive naval blockades all became possible because the skies were firmly under Allied control. The Hellcat was not the only reason for this dominance. Radar, anti-aircraft guns, and other aircraft all played their part, but it was the linchpin that held the entire system together. Without it, the balance of power in the air might never have shifted so decisively. Even Japan's last-ditch technological efforts could not overcome the Hellcat's dominance. New fighters like the Kawanishi N1K and Nakajima Ki-84, though impressive in their own right, were too few and too late to make a meaningful difference. They were often flown by inexperienced pilots against swarms of Hellcats, and their production was hampered by Allied bombing campaigns that targeted Japan's industrial capacity. The result was inevitable. By 1945, the skies over the Pacific were almost exclusively American territory. In retrospect, the Hellcat story is not just one of aerial supremacy, but of strategic inevitability. It represents the moment when industrial capacity, tactical doctrine, technological innovation, and pilot training all aligned perfectly. It was the embodiment of America's wartime advantage, the ability to not only build the tools of war, but to build them in such overwhelming numbers and with such consistent quality that no adversary could hope to match them. And while the Hellcat may have been designed to solve a specific problem, defeating the Zero, it did far more than that. It redefined what a carrier-based fighter could be and set a standard that future aircraft would strive to match. The lessons of the Hellcat era would resonate long after the last F6F rolled off the production line. Military planners around the world took note of the principles that underpinned its success: the value of simplicity, the importance of durability, the necessity of logistical support, and the transformative power of mass production. These lessons would shape aircraft development for decades, influencing everything from Cold War jet fighters to modern multi-role combat aircraft. Even today, echoes of the Hellcat's design philosophy can be seen in the aircraft that patrol the skies, machines built not just to win battles, but to win wars. As the world transitioned into the post-war era, the Hellcat's influence remained deeply embedded in military thinking and aviation technology. While many of the aircraft were retired or reassigned to training and support roles, their service had left a permanent mark on how nations approached aerial combat and naval strategy. For the United States, the lessons learned from the Hellcat's dominance became foundational. It had shown that air superiority wasn't just a tactical advantage. It was the key to unlocking every other aspect of modern warfare. Control of the skies meant freedom of movement on land and sea, the ability to strike deep into enemy territory, and the power to dictate the tempo of conflict. And it was the Hellcat that had demonstrated this truth most clearly in the Pacific. In the years immediately following World War II, naval aviation underwent a period of rapid transformation. Jet propulsion was emerging as the future, promising higher speeds, greater altitudes, and more advanced capabilities. Yet even as the jet age dawned, many of the doctrines and design philosophies that guided this new era were rooted in the experiences of the Hellcat. Engineers and strategists studied its successes and failures, dissecting every aspect of its performance to understand what had worked and why. They found that many of the principles behind its design, ruggedness, simplicity, adaptability, and firepower, were just as relevant to jet fighters as they had been to piston-engined ones. The transition wasn't without its challenges. Early jet fighters were often temperamental, difficult to maintain, and unforgiving to fly, a far cry from the Hellcat's user-friendly nature. Pilots accustomed to the stable, predictable handling of the F6F now had to contend with faster speeds, sharper acceleration, and new aerodynamic phenomena. Yet in many ways, the Hellcat's training legacy helped ease this transition. Because it had allowed such a wide range of pilots to master carrier operations, it created a generation of aviators who were confident, experienced, and adaptable, qualities that would prove invaluable as aviation technology advanced. The aircraft that followed in the Hellcat's footsteps bore its influence in countless ways. The Grumman F8F Bearcat, for example, was essentially a refined evolution of the F6F concept, smaller, faster, and optimized for high performance while retaining many of the Hellcat's strengths. Even more importantly, the lessons learned from the Hellcat shaped the design of early carrier-based jet fighters like the F9F Panther and F2H Banshee. These aircraft emphasized ease of maintenance, robust construction, and pilot-friendly handling, qualities that had been proven essential by the Hellcat's wartime performance. In this sense, the F6F wasn't just a fighter of its time, it was a bridge to the future. But beyond its technical legacy, the Hellcat also left behind a profound cultural and historical imprint. It became a symbol of America's wartime ingenuity and determination, a testament to what could be achieved when industry, science, and military necessity aligned. Museums across the United States proudly displayed restored Hellcats, and air shows often featured them as flying tributes to the pilots and crews who had fought in the Pacific. For veterans, seeing the distinctive shape of the F6F in flight often brought back powerful memories of dogfights over distant islands, of narrow escapes from deadly encounters, and of the camaraderie forged in the crucible of war. The public fascination with the Hellcat also helped shape post-war narratives about the Pacific conflict. Documentaries, books, and films frequently highlighted its role as a turning point in the aerial war against Japan. It became part of the larger story of America's industrial might, how a nation faced with overwhelming odds had mobilized its resources to build weapons that were not just effective, but decisive. And while aircraft like the P-51 Mustang and the Spitfire often captured the spotlight in discussions about World War II aviation, those who studied the Pacific theater knew that the Hellcat's contributions were just as critical, if not more so. One of the most interesting aspects of the Hellcat's legacy is how it shaped Japan's own approach to military aviation in the decades that followed. The devastating losses inflicted by the F6F forced Japanese engineers and strategists to rethink their reliance on ultralight, maneuverability-focused designs. Post-war aircraft development in Japan, much of it conducted under American oversight during the occupation, placed far greater emphasis on speed, protection, and versatility. In a way, the Hellcat not only defeated Japan's wartime air force, but also influenced the design philosophy of its future one. Even today, the Hellcat's reputation remains formidable among aviation historians and enthusiasts. It is frequently cited as one of the most successful fighter aircraft ever built, not just because of its kill count or its technological innovations, but because of how comprehensively it fulfilled its mission. It was designed to defeat the Zero, and it did. It was designed to protect carriers, and it did. It was designed to give pilots the best possible chance of survival, and it did. Few aircraft have ever so thoroughly achieved every objective set for them. In many ways, the Hellcat represents the ideal of what a military aircraft should be. Not necessarily the fastest or the most glamorous, but the most effective. The aircraft's enduring appeal also lies in its personality, if a machine can be said to have one. The Hellcat was often described as honest, a term pilots used to mean that it behaved predictably and responded faithfully to its controls. It didn't have hidden quirks or dangerous handling characteristics that could catch a pilot off guard. It was powerful but manageable, deadly but forgiving. This combination of qualities made it beloved not just by the men who flew it, but by the ground crews who maintained it and the commanders who relied on it. It was, in many ways, the quintessential soldier's machine, tough, dependable, and always ready to fight. Its combat record remains a point of awe even decades later. The Hellcat accounted for more than 75% of all aerial victories scored by U.S. Navy fighter pilots during the war. In total, it destroyed over 5,200 enemy aircraft, a figure unmatched by any other Allied naval fighter, and its kill-to-loss ratio, nearly 19-1, stands as one of the highest in aviation history. These statistics are not just numbers. They represent thousands of lives saved, missions accomplished, and battles won. They reflect a reality that once the Hellcat took to the skies, the outcome of the Pacific Air War was never truly in doubt again. In the broader sweep of history, the F6F Hellcat also helped usher in a new era of American military confidence. Its success symbolized the power of American industry, the effectiveness of its training programs, and the adaptability of its military doctrine. It showed that with the right combination of resources and resolve, even the most formidable adversaries could be overcome. That lesson, perhaps more than any other, would shape U.S. military strategy for the rest of the 20th century, influencing how future conflicts were planned and fought. By the time the last Hellcat was retired from frontline service, its legend was firmly etched into the annals of aviation history. Yet its influence extended far beyond the physical aircraft that had flown over the Pacific. The Hellcat represented a shift in how wars would be fought and won in the modern age, not through isolated acts of heroism or technological gimmicks, but through an integrated combination of smart design, industrial capacity, strategic planning, and relentless execution. It was proof that victory was not just about having the best pilots or the fastest planes. It was about building a system that maximized every advantage and minimized every weakness. The Pacific Theater was, in many ways, the ultimate proving ground for this new approach. The distances were vast, the logistics daunting, and the stakes enormous. Air combat wasn't just about duels between fighters. It was about controlling supply lines, supporting invasions, and neutralizing enemy fleets. The Hellcat excelled in this complex environment because it was never just a dogfighter. It was a multi-role workhorse, equally at home in aerial combat, ground attack, fleet defense, and escort missions. Its adaptability allowed commanders to use it in a variety of roles without sacrificing effectiveness, and that flexibility often made the difference between success and failure in the Pacific's sprawling, multidimensional battlespace. One of the most profound strategic advantages the Hellcat provided was its ability to ensure carrier strike groups remained viable offensive tools deep within enemy territory. Before its arrival, Japanese aircraft often forced U.S. carriers to operate cautiously, launching raids from a distance or avoiding heavily contested areas altogether. With Hellcats aboard, those same carriers became unstoppable juggernauts. Their fighter wings could sweep enemy skies clear ahead of a strike, defend against incoming raids, and provide continuous cover for returning bombers and torpedo planes. This created a self-reinforcing cycle. The more effective the Hellcats were, the more aggressive carrier operations became, and the more aggressive carrier operations became, the more decisive their impact on the war. The concept of carrier-based air superiority, proven so decisively by the Hellcat, would go on to define naval warfare for decades to come. Even in the nuclear age, aircraft carriers remained the centerpiece of naval power, and the lessons learned from the Hellcat's success continued to influence how those floating air bases were used. Future fighters like the F-4 Phantom, the F-14 Tomcat, and the F-A-18 Hornet would inherit the mission that the Hellcat had pioneered to ensure that carriers could go anywhere, strike anywhere, and dominate any airspace they entered. But for all its strategic significance, the Hellcat's story is also deeply human, a tale of courage, resilience, and sacrifice. Every number and statistic associated with the aircraft represents real lives. The pilots who climbed into its cockpit knowing that each mission could be their last. The deck crews who worked tirelessly under scorching sun and pounding rain to keep the fighters fueled, armed, and ready. The engineers and factory workers back home who built the planes with their own hands, often working double shifts to meet wartime demand. The Hellcat was a collective achievement, a product of a nation united in purpose and driven by necessity. Many of the pilots who flew Hellcats went on to have distinguished careers, their wartime experiences shaping their futures in profound ways. Some remained in the military, rising through the ranks to become admirals and commanders. Others became test pilots, airline captains, or pioneers in the emerging field of commercial aviation. But regardless of where life took them, they carried with them the lessons they had learned in the cockpit of the F-6F, lessons about discipline, teamwork, and perseverance under pressure. They knew what it meant to rely on their skills and their machine to survive, and they knew the immense responsibility that came with controlling the skies. There's also a profound emotional dimension to the Hellcat's legacy. For many veterans, the aircraft symbolizes their youth, a time when the stakes were unimaginably high and the world seemed balanced on a knife's edge. It reminds them of the friends they lost and the battles they fought, of the adrenaline-fueled dogfights and the quiet moments of reflection between missions. It's a symbol of triumph, but also of sacrifice. And that duality, victory and loss, pride and sorrow, is at the heart of the Hellcat's story. The cultural memory of the Hellcat has been kept alive not only through museums and memorials, but also through literature, film, and popular media. Countless books and documentaries have explored its role in the Pacific War, often highlighting its technical brilliance and battlefield success. But some of the most powerful tributes are the personal memoirs and oral histories of the men who flew and maintained it. Their stories paint a vivid picture of what it was like to strap into a Hellcat, throttle forward off a carrier deck, and climb into a sky filled with danger and uncertainty. They describe the heart-pounding moments when tracer rounds zipped past their canopy, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death, and the overwhelming relief of seeing their carrier deck appear on the horizon after a mission. In these stories, the Hellcat emerges as more than just a piece of machinery. It becomes almost a living entity, a trusted companion that shared their fate. Pilots spoke of their aircraft as if they were comrades, attributing personalities and temperaments to them. Some even gave their planes nicknames, painting nose art and personal symbols on the fuselage as a way of marking their bond. It's a reminder that in the chaos of war, the line between man and machine can blur, that a fighter plane can become not just a tool of destruction, but a vessel of hope and survival. The Hellcat's enduring appeal also speaks to a deeper truth about technology and warfare, that the most successful machines are those that serve the human beings who use them. The F-6F wasn't designed to impress engineers or win design awards. It was designed to make pilots more effective, to give them every possible advantage in the deadly arena of aerial combat. It was a machine built around the realities of human skill and limitation, and that human-centric approach is one of the reasons it was so devastatingly effective. It's a lesson that still resonates today as militaries around the world grapple with questions about automation, artificial intelligence, and the evolving role of human pilots in future conflicts. Today, more than 80 years after its first flight, the Hellcat remains a fixture at air shows, museums, and commemorative events. Enthusiasts meticulously restore and maintain surviving examples, ensuring that new generations can see, hear, and even feel what it was like to experience one of history's greatest fighters. When a Hellcat roars overhead at an air show, its engine thundering and its broad wings slicing through the air, it's more than just a display. It's a living connection to a pivotal moment in history. It's a reminder of what was achieved and what was sacrificed, and of the extraordinary impact a single aircraft can have on the course of a global conflict. Even as the decades rolled on and the world moved into the jet age, the legacy of the Hellcat continued to shape the future of aerial warfare in ways both obvious and subtle. Its success served as a powerful reminder of a fundamental truth in military aviation: technology alone does not win wars. What truly matters is the marriage of technology with doctrine, logistics, training, and strategic vision. The Hellcat wasn't just a superior airplane, it was part of a larger ecosystem that amplified its strengths and compensated for its weaknesses. This integrated approach would become the blueprint for how the United States and its allies designed, deployed, and supported military aircraft for generations to come. The lessons learned from the Hellcat's dominance were particularly influential during the Cold War, a period that saw rapid advancements in aviation technology and the emergence of new strategic realities. As jet fighters became faster, more complex, and more expensive, militaries grappled with the challenge of balancing cutting-edge performance with practical considerations like ease of maintenance, pilot training, and production scalability. Time and again, they returned to the lessons of the F-6F. It had demonstrated that a good enough aircraft, built in massive numbers, maintained easily, and flown by well-trained pilots, could be far more decisive than a small number of technologically superior but logistically burdensome machines. This philosophy was evident in many of the aircraft that followed. The F-86 Sabre, America's first truly successful jet fighter, combined speed and agility with reliability and ease of maintenance, much like the Hellcat had in its era. The F-4 Phantom II, one of the most versatile and widely used fighters of the 20th century, embodied the same principles of adaptability and multi-role capability. Even the F/A-18 Hornet, a staple of modern carrier aviation, owes part of its design philosophy to the Hellcat's legacy: rugged, versatile, easy to fly, and capable of performing a wide range of missions without compromising effectiveness. But perhaps the Hellcat's most enduring lesson is one that goes beyond technology or tactics. It's about the human element of war. The aircraft's forgiving nature allowed young, inexperienced pilots to succeed against seasoned veterans, proving that accessibility and pilot confidence are just as important as raw performance. This insight reshaped pilot training programs worldwide. Instead of focusing exclusively on producing elite, highly specialized pilots, militaries recognized the value of training larger numbers of competent aviators who could operate reliable, effective aircraft in significant quantities. The result was a dramatic increase in the scale and scope of air operations, a shift that would define aerial warfare for the rest of the century. The Hellcat also had a profound influence on the development of naval aviation doctrine. Before World War II, many strategists believed that battleships would remain the ultimate arbiters of naval power, with aircraft carriers serving in a supporting role. The success of the Hellcat, and of carrier aviation in general, shattered that assumption. The aircraft carrier, once seen as a supplementary asset, became the centerpiece of naval strategy. Fleets were reorganized around carrier strike groups, and immense resources were poured into developing new generations of carrier-based aircraft. The Hellcat's performance proved that whoever controlled the air controlled the sea, and whoever controlled the sea controlled the outcome of the war. The ripple effects of this strategic shift continue to this day. Modern navies still rely on carrier air wings as their primary instruments of power projection, and the principles that guided their use in World War II remain fundamentally unchanged. The aircraft may now be supersonic, stealthy, and armed with precision-guided weapons, but their core mission, to dominate the skies and protect the fleet, is the same one the Hellcat fulfilled so brilliantly in the 1940s. In this sense, the F-6F's legacy isn't just historical, it's a living part of modern military doctrine. Beyond the strategic and technological lessons, the Hellcat also occupies a unique place in the cultural memory of World War II. It represents a specific moment in time, a period when the world was locked in a struggle of unprecedented scale, when nations were pushed to their limits, and when the ingenuity of ordinary people changed the course of history. The Hellcat embodies the spirit of that era, resourceful, resilient, and relentless. It's a reminder that victory wasn't inevitable. It had to be built piece by piece, by millions of hands and countless acts of courage. That cultural resonance is why the Hellcat continues to captivate historians, filmmakers, and enthusiasts today. It appears in countless documentaries and historical works, often depicted as the symbol of Allied dominance in the Pacific. Model builders recreate its distinctive lines in meticulous detail. Flight simulators feature it as a fan-favorite aircraft, allowing modern audiences to experience, in some small way, what it was like to pilot one into combat. Aviation museums around the world preserve and display surviving Hellcats, their faded paint and battle scars serving as tangible reminders of a time when the fate of the world hung in the balance. One of the most powerful aspects of the Hellcat story is the way it illustrates the relationship between innovation and necessity. The aircraft wasn't designed in a vacuum. It was born of urgent need, forged under the pressures of war, and shaped by the lessons of previous failures. Every rivet, every bolt, every line of its airframe was a response to a real problem faced by pilots and commanders, and because it was designed with such a clear purpose, it excelled in that role beyond anyone's expectations. This principle, that the most effective solutions often emerge from the most pressing challenges, remains a guiding truth in military technology to this day. It's also worth reflecting on the human ingenuity behind the Hellcat's creation. The engineers at Grumman weren't just building an airplane. They were solving a problem that could determine the fate of nations. They worked under immense pressure, often racing against time, resource shortages, and shifting battlefield realities. Yet they succeeded. And in doing so, they demonstrated the extraordinary capacity of human innovation when driven by necessity. The story of the Hellcat is, in many ways, a story about the people who built it as much as the people who flew it. And then there are the stories of those who flew the Hellcat into battle, stories that continue to inspire awe and admiration. Pilots recalled dogfights where they faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious thanks to the Hellcat's power and resilience. Others remembered harrowing moments when their aircraft was riddled with bullets only to bring them safely home against all expectations. Each story is a testament to the bond between pilot and machine, a bond forged in the crucible of war and sealed by mutual dependence. Ultimately, the Hellcat is more than just a chapter in the history of World War II. It's a symbol of what can be achieved when a nation commits itself fully to a cause, when innovation, industry, and determination converge with purpose. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, human ingenuity can rise to meet the greatest challenges. And it's a testament to the idea that a single machine, built with vision and driven by necessity, can change the course of history. The story of the Hellcat is also, in a deeper sense, the story of transformation, not just of warfare, but of a nation and its people. When the United States entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor, it was still emerging from the shadows of the Great Depression. Its military was understrength, its industrial base geared more toward consumer goods than armaments, and its people largely untested in the crucible of global conflict. But in less than 4 years, the nation transformed itself into an industrial powerhouse capable of producing weapons on a scale the world had never seen. And few symbols capture that transformation more powerfully than the F6F Hellcat. The sheer speed and scale of Hellcat production remain staggering even by modern standards. In less than 3 years, Grumman produced more than 12,000 of the aircraft, a feat that required massive coordination between thousands of workers, suppliers, and transport networks. Factories operated around the clock with shifts overlapping so that production never stopped. Women, many of whom had never worked in manufacturing before, became riveters, assemblers, and inspectors, playing a crucial role in keeping the assembly lines moving. Skilled craftsmen shared factory floors with recent high school graduates, all united by a single goal: to build the machines that would help win the war. This industrial mobilization was one of the most decisive factors in the Allied victory, and the Hellcat was one of its crowning achievements. While Japan struggled to replace the aircraft and pilots it lost in combat, the United States was producing Hellcats faster than they could be shot down. Even if one was lost, another was already rolling off the production line to take its place. This relentless output overwhelmed Japanese defenses and ensured that the U.S. Navy always had more planes, more pilots, and more firepower than its enemy. In this way, the Hellcat was not just a weapon. It was a manifestation of America's industrial strength, a flying embodiment of the nation's capacity to outproduce and outlast its foes. The transformation extended beyond the factories and assembly lines. The Hellcat also revolutionized pilot training and tactics, forcing the U.S. Navy to rethink how it prepared its aviators for combat. Gone were the days when a handful of elite pilots would carry the burden of air combat. Instead, the Navy developed training programs designed to produce large numbers of highly competent pilots quickly and efficiently. Flight schools sprang up across the country, turning out waves of aviators who were then refined through advanced training on aircraft carriers and in simulated combat environments. The emphasis was on teamwork, coordination, and adaptability, qualities that would prove essential in the vast and unpredictable battles of the Pacific. Tactics evolved alongside training. Early in the war, American pilots had struggled against the nimble Japanese Zero, often trying to outmaneuver it in dogfights, a losing proposition given the Zero's superior agility. With the arrival of the Hellcat, tactics shifted dramatically. Pilots began to exploit their aircraft's strengths: superior speed, dive performance, and durability. Instead of turning fights, they used boom and zoom tactics, diving from altitude, striking with overwhelming firepower, and then climbing away before the enemy could respond. These tactics neutralized the Zero's agility advantage and played directly to the Hellcat's strengths. The result was a series of crushing victories that further tilted the balance of power in the air. The Hellcat's dominance also changed the way the U.S. Navy approached carrier task force operations. Previously, carriers had often operated separately or in small groups, each with its own complement of aircraft. But with the Hellcat providing unmatched air cover, the Navy began to combine carriers into massive task forces, concentrating their power and striking capability. These task forces could project overwhelming force across thousands of miles of ocean, launching coordinated strikes against enemy fleets, bases, and supply lines. The Hellcat was the shield that made this possible, clearing the skies of enemy fighters and intercepting bombers before they could threaten the carriers. Without that shield, the carrier task force concept might never have reached its full potential. One of the most dramatic examples of this new operational doctrine came during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. With hundreds of Hellcats flying combat air patrols, the U.S. Navy was able to detect and destroy Japanese airstrikes long before they could reach the fleet. The result was a one-sided slaughter that became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, with Japanese losses so severe that their carrier air power never fully recovered. It was a textbook demonstration of how superior aircraft combined with effective tactics and coordinated fleet operations could completely redefine the dynamics of naval warfare. Beyond its direct combat achievements, the Hellcat also played an important role in shaping post-war aviation culture. Many of the pilots who flew it became instructors, test pilots, or engineers after the war, bringing with them a wealth of knowledge and experience that helped shape the next generation of aircraft. Their insights into aerial tactics, pilot training, and aircraft design influenced everything from Cold War-era fighters to commercial jetliners. The Hellcat's emphasis on durability and ease of maintenance also set new standards for military aircraft, encouraging designers to prioritize reliability and maintainability alongside speed and firepower. The aircraft even left its mark on the civilian world. Surplus Hellcats were sold to private owners and foreign air forces after the war, where they continued to fly for years in a variety of roles. Some were used in aerial firefighting, others in experimental programs, and still others as racing planes in post-war air competitions. Their rugged construction and powerful engines made them well suited to these diverse tasks, and their continued use long after the war ended is a testament to their enduring quality. Yet perhaps the most profound impact of the Hellcat lies not in its hardware or even in its historical achievements, but in the lessons it teaches about resilience, adaptation, and the power of collective effort. The aircraft was born out of adversity, designed to solve a seemingly insurmountable problem: how to defeat an enemy that had a head start in technology, training, and experience. It succeeded not because it was perfect, but because it was good enough in every way that mattered, and because it was supported by a system that amplified its strengths. That lesson, that victory belongs not to the perfect, but to the prepared, is as relevant today as it was in 1943. Even now, more than 8 decades later, the Hellcat continues to inspire. Its story is taught in military academies as a case study in effective design and deployment. Its image appears on commemorative coins, stamps, and posters. And its surviving airframes, lovingly restored and maintained by museums and private collectors, stand as living monuments to the courage, ingenuity, and determination of the generation that built and flew them. When people gather to watch a Hellcat taxi down a runway and lift into the sky, they're not just watching a machine, they're witnessing history come alive. By the time the Second World War drew to a close, the Hellcat had not only rewritten the story of aerial warfare in the Pacific, but had also cemented itself as one of the most important combat aircraft ever built. Yet its legacy was not limited to its wartime performance. It became a symbol of what America's wartime mobilization could achieve. In many ways, the Hellcat was the ultimate expression of a nation's industrial, technological, and human potential, converging toward a single purpose. It was more than the sum of its parts, more than its engine, more than its armament, more than its rugged frame. It was the embodiment of an idea that determination, ingenuity, and cooperation could overcome even the most daunting of challenges. As the world transitioned from war to peace, the aircraft that had once been a harbinger of destruction found new roles in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. Many Hellcats were repurposed for training missions, helping to prepare a new generation of naval aviators in the early days of the Cold War. Others were used for carrier qualification exercises, serving as stepping stones for pilots transitioning to newer jet-powered aircraft. Even in these humbler roles, the F6F continued to shape the future of naval aviation, passing on its legacy of reliability and resilience to those who would carry it forward into a new era. Some Hellcats even found themselves flying under foreign flags. Allied nations that had fought alongside the United States during the war received surplus aircraft as part of post-war assistance programs, using them to bolster their own air forces during the uncertain early years of the Cold War. In places like France, Uruguay, and Argentina, the F-6F continued to serve well into the late 1940s and early 1950s, often in roles far removed from the desperate aerial duels of the Pacific. These post-war deployments further demonstrated the Hellcat's versatility and durability, proving that it could remain effective even in vastly different operational contexts. The post-war years also saw the emergence of a new type of conflict, one that was fought not just on the battlefield, but in the realm of ideology, influence, and technology. As the United States and the Soviet Union entered a protracted struggle for global dominance, the lessons of World War II remained deeply relevant. Air superiority, the Hellcat had shown, was not just a tactical necessity, but a strategic imperative. Whoever controlled the skies controlled the narrative of modern warfare. And while the jet-powered fighters of the Cold War bore little physical resemblance to the F-6F, they were built on the same foundational principles: superior performance, pilot survivability, operational flexibility, and ease of production and maintenance. But the Hellcat's influence wasn't confined to military doctrine and technology. It also shaped the cultural memory of the war, and, by extension, the way future generations understood and interpreted that era. For many Americans, the Hellcat became a symbol of hope and resilience during one of the darkest periods in history. Photographs of the rugged fighter soaring over the Pacific appeared in newspapers and magazines, often accompanied by stories of daring pilots and dramatic victories. Its image was used in war bond campaigns and recruitment posters, inspiring countless young men to enlist and countless families to contribute to the war effort. The Hellcat was more than a weapon. It was a rallying point, a source of national pride. Even decades later, the aircraft continues to occupy a special place in popular culture. Films and documentaries about the Pacific War frequently feature the Hellcat, often highlighting its role as the plane that broke Japan's back. Aviation enthusiasts build scale models of the F-6F, while video games and flight simulators allow players to relive its most famous battles in virtual skies. Its unmistakable silhouette, with its broad wings, robust fuselage, and distinctive engine cowling, remains instantly recognizable to anyone with even a passing interest in aviation history. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of the Hellcat's legacy is the human one. The stories of the men who flew it, maintained it, and trusted it with their lives. Many of those stories have been passed down through generations, becoming part of the fabric of family histories and community memories. Veterans spoke of the intense camaraderie that developed among Hellcat squadrons, of the unspoken trust that bound them together as they faced death on a daily basis. They remembered the tension of waiting for the call to launch, the adrenaline of catapulting off a carrier deck, the terrifying chaos of aerial combat, and the overwhelming relief of seeing their ship's deck come into view after a mission. For many, the Hellcat wasn't just an aircraft, it was a lifeline. Some of the most poignant stories came from pilots who survived encounters that should have been fatal. There are countless accounts of Hellcats returning to their carriers with wings shredded, engines smoking, and fuel leaking, only to touch down safely and be repaired for another mission. These stories became part of the aircraft's mythology, reinforcing its reputation as a plane that could bring you home. One pilot famously remarked that the Hellcat made average pilots good and good pilots great, a testament to the confidence it inspired in those who flew it. That confidence, in turn, allowed pilots to take risks they might otherwise have avoided, risks that often led to decisive victories. The Hellcat also forged bonds that lasted long after the war ended. Many veterans maintained lifelong friendships with the men they had served alongside, their shared experiences in the cockpit and on the carrier deck creating a connection that transcended time and distance. Reunions of Hellcat squadrons became annual events, opportunities to reminisce, honor fallen comrades, and celebrate the machine that had been such a central part of their lives. At these gatherings, the aircraft was often spoken of with a kind of reverence, not as a mere tool of war, but as a trusted companion that had shared in their triumphs and tragedies. In the decades since World War II, the Hellcat has also become an object of fascination for historians and scholars who study it not just as a machine, but as a cultural and historical artifact. Its design, production, deployment, and legacy offer insights into everything from industrial mobilization and technological innovation to social change and national identity. It serves as a lens through which to understand the broader dynamics of the war, how nations adapted to new challenges, how societies rallied around common goals, and how ordinary people achieved extraordinary things under extraordinary circumstances. The aircraft's continued relevance in these discussions underscores a larger truth. The Hellcat was not just a product of its time, it helped define its time. It was both a reflection of the world that created it and a force that helped shape the world that followed. Its story is not confined to the past. It echoes into the present, reminding us of the enduring power of ingenuity, determination, and collective effort. If there is one defining theme to emerge from the story of the Hellcat, it is the idea that success in war, and indeed in any great endeavor, is rarely the result of a single innovation or individual act of heroism. Instead, it is the product of 1,000 interconnected decisions, each building upon the last, creating a foundation on which victory can stand. The Hellcat embodies this truth perfectly. It wasn't the fastest fighter in the war. It wasn't the most maneuverable nor the most technologically advanced. But it was the right aircraft, built at the right time, for the right mission. And in the unforgiving crucible of the Pacific War, that was what mattered most. This concept is evident when one looks at the broader strategic picture of the Pacific conflict. By 1943, the United States and its allies were engaged in a grueling campaign to roll back Japanese expansion, island by island, base by base. Success depended on a complex interplay of forces: naval power to transport troops and supplies, ground forces to seize and hold territory, logistics to sustain operations across vast distances, and air power to support all of it. The Hellcat's introduction into this equation was transformative. Suddenly, the U.S. Navy had a fighter that could dominate the skies over any battlefield, giving ground troops uncontested air support, protecting fleets from enemy bombers, and paving the way for strategic bombing raids on Japanese infrastructure. Its presence reshaped how campaigns were planned and executed. With Hellcats flying air cover, amphibious assaults could proceed with far greater confidence. Bombing raids could be conducted deep into enemy territory without fear of devastating losses. Naval task forces could approach enemy strongholds without the constant threat of aerial attack. The Hellcat gave Allied commanders a level of operational flexibility they had never had before, and that flexibility often proved decisive. Battles that might once have taken months to plan and execute could now be launched in weeks. Objectives that had once seemed impossible were now within reach. The strategic shift was especially evident during the final stages of the war, as the Allies closed in on Japan's home islands. Massive carrier task forces, shielded by swarms of Hellcats, advanced ever closer to the Japanese mainland. Airfields and industrial centers were systematically bombed into ruin, cutting off Japan's ability to sustain its war effort. Supply lines were severed, naval bases destroyed, and communication networks crippled. The once formidable Imperial Japanese Navy and Air Service were reduced to shadows of their former selves, their few remaining aircraft often destroyed on the ground before they could even take off. The Hellcat wasn't the only factor in this relentless campaign, but it was one of the most important, the tip of the spear in a strategy that combined overwhelming firepower with surgical precision. It's worth noting, too, that the Hellcat's impact extended beyond the immediate military realm. Its success had profound political and psychological consequences as well. For the United States and its allies, the Hellcat became a symbol of unstoppable momentum, tangible proof that the tide of the war had turned irrevocably in their favor. Each victory it helped secure brought the Allied nations one step closer to victory, strengthening public morale and reinforcing the belief that total victory was not only possible, but inevitable. For Japan, the Hellcat was a harbinger of defeat, a daily reminder of their dwindling power and the futility of continued resistance. The psychological dimension of air superiority is often underestimated, but it played a critical role in shaping the course of the war. When one side controls the skies, the other side's options shrink dramatically. Supply convoys must move under cover of darkness. Troop movements become riskier, communications are disrupted. Even basic morale suffers as soldiers and civilians alike realize that the enemy can strike from above at any time, with little they can do to stop it. The Hellcat imposed exactly this kind of psychological pressure on Japan, contributing to the erosion of its will to fight and accelerating the path to surrender. The aircraft's influence can also be seen in the realm of innovation and industrial policy. The success of the Hellcat and other wartime programs demonstrated the immense potential of public-private collaboration in times of national crisis. The partnership between Grumman and the U.S. Navy was a model of efficiency with rapid feedback loops, flexible production processes, and a shared sense of urgency driving constant improvement. This model would later inform countless Cold War defense programs, from jet fighters to missile systems to space exploration. The idea that government and industry could work hand in hand to achieve extraordinary technological breakthroughs became a cornerstone of American strategic thinking, and it was proven in part by the success of the Hellcat. Even as the Hellcat became a historical artifact, its story continued to inspire innovation. The design philosophies it embodied, simplicity, ruggedness, adaptability, found echoes in everything from Cold War jet fighters to modern unmanned aerial vehicles. Engineers and designers continued to study its balance of performance and practicality, its user-friendly cockpit layout, and its robust systems. Many of these lessons remain relevant today, even as aviation technology pushes into realms the Hellcat's designers could scarcely have imagined. In a world of stealth aircraft, hypersonic missiles, and artificial intelligence, the fundamental truths the Hellcat revealed about the importance of reliability, ease of use, and human factors are as valuable as ever. The Hellcat story also serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of preparation and foresight. The aircraft's success was not an accident. It was the result of years of accumulated knowledge, hard-earned lessons, and deliberate choices. It built on the experiences of the F4F Wildcat and other earlier fighters, incorporating feedback from pilots and adapting to the realities of modern naval warfare. It benefited from a robust industrial base, capable of scaling up production quickly and efficiently, and it was deployed as part of a coherent strategy that recognized the centrality of air power to victory. All of these elements came together to create a weapon that was greater than the sum of its parts, and that is a lesson with implications far beyond the realm of aviation. Perhaps most importantly, the Hellcat reminds us of the human dimension of war, the courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice that underpin every technological achievement. It is easy to be dazzled by statistics, the thousands of enemy aircraft shot down, the near-perfect kill ratio, the decisive battles won. But behind each of those numbers are human stories. The pilots who risked their lives in desperate dogfights, the engineers who poured their expertise into perfecting the design, the factory workers who labored day and night to keep the production lines running. The Hellcat's success was their success, and its legacy is a testament to their collective effort. In the end, the F6F Hellcat was far more than a fighter plane. It was a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity, a triumph of collaboration and innovation, and a decisive instrument of victory in one of the most consequential conflicts in human history. Its story is a story of transformation, of technology, of strategy, of nations, and of people. And it stands as a timeless reminder of what can be achieved when purpose, ingenuity, and determination come together in service of a common goal. As the final years of the Second World War approached, the F6F Hellcat had already cemented its place as the undisputed king of the Pacific skies. But the full measure of its legacy would not be understood until the guns fell silent, and historians had the time to look back and piece together the story of how an unassuming, rugged fighter helped turn the tide of the most expansive naval war in history. The Hellcat's journey, from its rapid development to its overwhelming success in combat, reveals more than just the story of a remarkable machine. It offers a window into the mindset, capabilities, and values of the society that built it and the people who flew it. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Hellcat story is just how quickly it came together. From the drawing board to its first flight in 1942, the aircraft was designed, tested, and refined at a pace that would seem impossible by modern standards. Grumman's engineers were driven by a single, urgent goal: to deliver a fighter that could not only match but surpass the Japanese Zero. They had the benefit of hard-earned experience. The lessons learned from the F4F Wildcat's shortcomings were invaluable, but they also faced immense pressure. Every day spent in development was another day that American pilots were dying in inferior planes. Every delay risked ceding more ground and more lives to an enemy that still held the advantage in the skies. That urgency drove a level of focus and innovation that remains one of the most impressive feats of wartime engineering. The speed of development was matched only by the speed of production. Once the Hellcat proved itself in testing, Grumman wasted no time ramping up manufacturing. Entire factories were retooled to meet the demand. Supply chains were reorganized to ensure a steady flow of materials. And as the assembly lines roared to life, the F6F began rolling off them in ever-increasing numbers. This rapid mobilization was a testament not only to industrial capability, but also to national resolve. The United States understood that victory in the Pacific would require overwhelming force, and it was willing to invest whatever it took to achieve it. The Hellcat was the embodiment of that commitment, a machine built not just to fight battles, but to win a war. It's also worth remembering that the Hellcat's dominance was not inevitable. At the time of its development, the Japanese Zero was still considered one of the most formidable fighters in the world. Its unmatched agility and range had allowed Japan to achieve air superiority across vast swaths of the Pacific, and many doubted whether the U.S. could produce a plane capable of defeating it. Yet the Hellcat did more than just compete with the Zero. It rendered it obsolete. With its superior speed, firepower, durability, and climb rate, the F6F flipped the balance of power in the skies almost overnight. What had once been a lopsided contest in Japan's favor became a one-sided rout. This reversal had profound strategic implications. Air superiority was not just a tactical advantage, it was the key that unlocked the rest of the Allied strategy. With the Hellcat securing the skies, amphibious assaults could proceed without fear of devastating air attacks. Carrier task forces could operate deep inside enemy territory with confidence. Bombers could strike Japanese bases, factories, and infrastructure with impunity. The Hellcat made all of this possible, and in doing so, it helped accelerate the end of the war. It is no exaggeration to say that without the F6F, the Pacific campaign might have dragged on far longer, at far greater cost in lives and resources. Beyond its immediate impact, the Hellcat also represented a significant leap forward in the philosophy of aircraft design. Previous generations of fighters had often been specialized, optimized for speed, maneuverability, or range at the expense of other capabilities. The Hellcat was different. It was designed as a complete package, fast enough to catch the enemy, heavily armed enough to destroy them, tough enough to survive damage, and forgiving enough for inexperienced pilots to fly effectively. This holistic approach set a new standard for fighter design, one that would influence aircraft development for decades to come. The emphasis on pilot survivability was especially significant. Warplanes are ultimately only as effective as the men who fly them, and the Hellcat was designed with their safety in mind. Its armored cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and rugged construction dramatically increased a pilot's chances of surviving hits that would have been fatal in other aircraft. This not only saved lives but also preserved valuable combat experience. Pilots who survived one mission could fly another and another, honing their skills and passing on hard-earned lessons to their comrades. In a war where pilot training could not keep pace with losses, that survivability was a decisive advantage. The Hellcat's pilot-friendly design also changed the nature of aerial combat. Many Allied pilots entered the war with minimal training, often just a few dozen hours of flight time before being thrust into battle. In other aircraft, that lack of experience could be deadly, but the Hellcat's forgiving handling and stable flight characteristics gave even green pilots a fighting chance. It allowed them to focus on tactics and situational awareness rather than struggling to control their aircraft. Over time, this meant that American pilots, even those with far less experience than their Japanese counterparts, could meet and often defeat them in combat. It was an equalizer in the truest sense. The combination of superior performance, ruggedness, and pilot friendliness made the Hellcat a fearsome adversary, and its combat record reflects that. By the end of the war, Hellcat pilots had destroyed more than 5,200 enemy aircraft, more than any other Allied naval fighter. Its kill-to-loss ratio of nearly 19-to-1 is one of the most impressive in aviation history. These numbers are more than just statistics. They are evidence of how completely the F6F dominated the skies once it entered service. For Japan, the appearance of the Hellcat marked the beginning of the end of its air power. For the United States, it was a decisive step on the road to victory. The Hellcat's influence extended beyond the war's end. Its design principles, simplicity, ruggedness, versatility, and pilot-centric engineering, became cornerstones of aircraft development in the jet age. Many of the lessons learned from the F6F were applied directly to the first generation of jet fighters, and its legacy can be seen in everything from the F-86 Sabre to the F-14 Tomcat. Even modern aircraft, with their advanced avionics and stealth capabilities, continue to reflect the priorities first embodied by the Hellcat. The idea that a fighter should be powerful, survivable, adaptable, and easy to fly remains as relevant today as it was in 1943. And while technology has evolved beyond anything the designers at Grumman could have imagined, the spirit of the Hellcat, the determination to build a machine that could meet the challenges of its time and overcome them, lives on. It lives on in every carrier fighter that launches from a deck into hostile skies, in every pilot who trusts their aircraft to bring them home, and in every mission where air superiority turns the tide of battle. The F6F Hellcat may belong to history, but its legacy is timeless. The Hellcat's dominance in the Pacific was not just a story of one fighter outperforming another. It was a demonstration of how air power, when wielded effectively, can reshape the dynamics of an entire war. By the time the F6F entered combat in 1943, Japan's once vaunted Zero was beginning to show its age, but it remained a formidable opponent in the hands of experienced pilots. The Hellcat didn't merely match it, it overwhelmed it, changing the very nature of aerial engagements. Where once dogfights had been evenly matched contests of skill and agility, they now became lopsided encounters in which Allied pilots held every advantage. That transformation was a turning point not just tactically, but psychologically and strategically. From a tactical perspective, the Hellcat's superior speed, dive performance, and firepower allowed American pilots to dictate the terms of combat. They could engage when it suited them and disengage when it did not. This ability to control the tempo of a fight is one of the most significant advantages any combat aircraft can offer, and the F6F delivered it in spades. Japanese pilots, who had once used their aircraft's agility to dance circles around slower, less powerful American planes, suddenly found themselves on the defensive, forced into reactive maneuvers that played into Allied hands. Over time, this shift eroded their confidence and sapped their effectiveness, making each subsequent engagement easier for the Americans to win. Strategically, the consequences were even more profound. Air superiority is not just about winning dogfights, it's about shaping the conditions under which battles are fought. With the Hellcat dominating the skies, the U.S. Navy could project power far deeper into enemy territory than ever before. Carrier task forces could operate closer to Japanese-held islands, striking at bases and supply lines with impunity. Amphibious invasions could proceed with reduced risk of air attack. Even long-range bombing raids on the Japanese mainland became more feasible, as Hellcats provided escort and cleared the skies of defenders. In short, the F6F gave the Allies freedom of action, and that freedom was a decisive factor in their eventual victory. But perhaps the most significant impact of the Hellcat's supremacy was the psychological one. Air power has always been about more than just physical destruction. It is also a powerful tool of intimidation and demoralization. The presence of Hellcats overhead sent a clear message to Japanese troops and civilians alike. The skies belonged to the Allies, and there was nothing they could do to change that. This loss of control had a cascading effect on morale, undermining confidence not only in Japan's air force but in its broader war effort. As Japanese pilots were shot down in ever-increasing numbers, their replacements, often hastily trained and poorly prepared, stood little chance of reversing the tide. The Hellcat's ability to generate such overwhelming results was not just a function of its design, it was also a testament to the system that supported it. From the moment it entered service, the aircraft benefited from an unparalleled logistical infrastructure that ensured it was always available in sufficient numbers and always maintained at peak readiness. American carriers carried spare parts, mechanics, and even replacement airframes, allowing damaged Hellcats to be repaired or swapped out quickly. Pilots received continuous training and tactical updates based on the latest combat data, ensuring they were always one step ahead of their adversaries. This integration of technology, logistics, and doctrine was one of the unsung keys to the Hellcat's success. It's also worth highlighting how the Hellcat's dominance reshaped Japanese strategy, often in ways that further hastened their defeat. Faced with mounting losses and an increasingly untenable situation in the air, Japan was forced to divert resources from offensive operations to defensive ones. Fighter units that might have supported naval strikes or offensive campaigns were instead tied down, defending the home islands and critical bases. New aircraft designs were rushed into service, often before they were fully tested or production-ready, leading to reliability issues and further losses. In some cases, Japan resorted to desperate measures such as kamikaze attacks in a bid to compensate for its inability to achieve air superiority. These shifts reflected a strategic reality that the Hellcat had helped create. Japan could no longer take the initiative in the air. The F6F's dominance also had a profound influence on Allied tactics and doctrine. Recognizing the advantages their aircraft conferred, American commanders increasingly emphasized aggressive, offensive operations designed to exploit those strengths. Carrier task forces launched deep penetration raids on Japanese strongholds, often striking targets hundreds of miles from the nearest friendly base. Fighter sweeps preceded bombing raids, clearing the skies and ensuring minimal losses. Hellcats were also used in roles that went beyond air-to-air combat, including ground attack, close air support, and reconnaissance. Their versatility allowed them to contribute to nearly every aspect of the Pacific Campaign, further magnifying their impact. One of the more remarkable aspects of the Hellcat's service was its adaptability. Although it was designed primarily as a fighter, it proved highly effective in secondary roles, such as fighter-bomber missions. Armed with bombs or rockets, Hellcats provided close air support for ground troops during amphibious landings, strafed enemy shipping, and attacked infrastructure targets such as airfields and supply depots. This ability to transition seamlessly between roles made the aircraft an invaluable asset and allowed commanders to make the most of their available resources. It also foreshadowed the evolution of the multi-role fighter concept, which would become standard practice in the jet age. Another key factor in the Hellcat's enduring success was its ability to remain relevant even as the war evolved. Many aircraft that entered service in the early 1940s were rendered obsolete by rapid technological advancements within a few years. The Hellcat, however, continued to perform effectively until the very end of the war, adapting to new threats and mission requirements with ease. This longevity was a testament to the foresight of its designers, who had built the aircraft with ample performance margins and upgrade potential. As a result, the F6F remained a potent force from its first mission to its last, a rare achievement in the fast-paced world of wartime aviation. The aircraft's adaptability extended even to specialized variants, such as the F6F5N night fighter, which was equipped with radar to intercept enemy aircraft under cover of darkness. This capability gave the U.S. Navy a significant edge in nighttime operations, a domain that had previously been dominated by the Japanese. Other variants were modified for reconnaissance or photo mapping missions, providing valuable intelligence that informed Allied planning. These adaptations underscored the Hellcat's versatility and further enhanced its value to the war effort. As the Pacific War neared its conclusion, the Hellcat had achieved something remarkable. It had not only helped the Allies win the war, but had done so in a way that fundamentally changed the nature of naval aviation. It proved that carrier-based fighters could achieve and maintain air superiority over vast distances, that multi-role aircraft could perform a wide range of missions effectively, and that technological superiority, when combined with industrial might and tactical innovation, could overwhelm even the most determined adversary. These lessons would shape the strategies and technologies of the post-war era, influencing everything from carrier design to pilot training to the development of future fighter aircraft. The legacy of the Hellcat, then, is not confined to the history books. It lives on in every carrier air wing that sails today, in every multi-role fighter that combines air superiority with ground attack capabilities, and in every doctrine that emphasizes the integration of technology, logistics, and strategy. It is a legacy that continues to shape the future of aerial warfare, a legacy born not just of one aircraft's success, but of what that success taught the world about the nature of power, technology, and victory. As World War II entered its final year, the Hellcat's supremacy was so complete that its presence had become almost synonymous with American air power in the Pacific. Its deep, guttural engine note overhead was a sound that Japanese troops had come to dread, a signal that their skies were no longer safe, that enemy fighters could appear anywhere, anytime, and that resistance was increasingly futile. Yet even in these final desperate months, the Hellcat's story was still being written. It wasn't merely a tool of destruction, it was a symbol of momentum, of inevitability, and of a relentless march toward victory that no force could stop. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 was the moment when the Hellcat's reputation transformed from that of a formidable fighter into a legendary one. Often referred to as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, this engagement saw American carrier forces, protected by swarms of Hellcats, annihilate wave after wave of Japanese aircraft. The result was catastrophic for Japan. More than 600 enemy planes were destroyed, most of them by F-6F pilots. Many of Japan's most experienced aviators perished in that battle, their losses impossible to replace. For the United States, it was the ultimate validation of the Hellcat's design and its doctrine, a clear demonstration that air superiority was now firmly, irrevocably in Allied hands. The consequences of that battle rippled far beyond the immediate tactical victory. With Japan's air defenses shattered, the Allies were able to launch amphibious assaults on the Mariana Islands, operations that brought them within striking distance of the Japanese mainland for the first time. From these newly captured bases, B-29 bombers could now target Japan's industrial heartland, accelerating the collapse of its war economy. The Hellcat, by securing the skies over the Marianas, had effectively opened the door to the strategic bombing campaign that would devastate Japan's cities and cripple its capacity to wage war. Another pivotal moment came during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, the largest naval battle in history and one of the most decisive engagements of the Pacific War. Hellcats once again played a central role, intercepting Japanese aircraft, protecting American ships from kamikaze attacks, and providing close air support for surface actions. Their presence ensured that the U.S. fleet could operate freely, enabling the amphibious invasion of the Philippines, a crucial step in cutting Japan off from its resource supplies in Southeast Asia. By the end of the battle, Japanese naval aviation was effectively destroyed, and the Imperial Navy would never again mount a serious challenge to American dominance at sea. These victories were not just battles won, they were turning points that accelerated the end of the war, and at every stage the Hellcat was at the center of the action, a constant, unyielding presence that defined the new balance of power in the Pacific. Its pilots, many of them barely out of their teens, were now seasoned veterans, their confidence bolstered by an aircraft they trusted implicitly. The bond between man and machine grew stronger with each mission as pilots pushed their Hellcats to the limit in pursuit of victory. The aircraft's role in psychological warfare cannot be overstated. As Japan's losses mounted and its air defenses crumbled, the very sight of a Hellcat could have a demoralizing effect on enemy troops. Pilots described how Japanese fighters would sometimes break off engagements prematurely, unwilling to face the F-6F's overwhelming advantages in speed, firepower, and durability. Even kamikaze pilots, whose missions were by nature suicidal, often failed to reach their targets under the relentless pressure of Hellcat patrols. The psychological weight of facing an opponent who seemed unbeatable, whose aircraft outclassed your own in every way, was a weapon in itself. The Hellcat's dominance also provided invaluable strategic options for Allied commanders. With air superiority secured, they could focus their efforts on other aspects of the war effort without the constant threat of aerial interference. Amphibious assaults, logistical convoys, and bombing campaigns could all be planned and executed with far greater freedom and precision. This allowed the Allies to accelerate the tempo of their operations, overwhelming Japanese defenses with a relentless series of offensives that left them reeling. In this way, the Hellcat was not just a participant in the war, it was an enabler of victory. But while the Hellcat's combat record is often measured in numbers, enemy aircraft destroyed, missions flown, battles won, its true impact can also be found in the stories of the men who flew it. These were pilots who often entered combat with little experience, thrust into the chaos of aerial warfare against a determined and skillful enemy. The Hellcat gave them a fighting chance, and more often than not, it brought them home. Many pilots credited the aircraft with saving their lives, its rugged construction and forgiving handling, allowing them to survive situations that might have been fatal in any other plane. Some of the most remarkable stories of the war involve Hellcats returning to their carriers in seemingly impossible condition, riddled with bullets, missing large sections of control surfaces, or flying on one engine. One pilot recalled limping back over hundreds of miles of open ocean with a gaping hole in his wing, barely keeping the aircraft aloft. Another described crash landing on a carrier deck with his landing gear shot away and walking away without a scratch. These stories speak to more than just engineering excellence. They speak to the trust that pilots placed in their aircraft and the sense of invincibility it inspired. The Hellcat's reputation for toughness also had a profound effect on pilot morale. Knowing that their aircraft could absorb punishment and still bring them home gave pilots the confidence to push harder, take more risks, and engage the enemy more aggressively. This confidence often translated directly into tactical success, as Hellcat pilots pressed attacks that might otherwise have been abandoned. It also meant that even inexperienced aviators, still honing their skills in the crucible of combat, could hold their own against veteran Japanese pilots. Critical advantage as the war dragged on and attrition took its toll on both sides. By the time Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, the Hellcat had more than lived up to its promise. It had destroyed over 5,200 enemy aircraft, achieved a kill-to-loss ratio unmatched by any other fighter of the war, and played a pivotal role in nearly every major battle of the Pacific campaign. It had turned inexperienced pilots into aces, crippled Japan's air power, and enabled the strategic bombing campaign that hastened the war's end. In the process, it had become a legend, a symbol of American ingenuity, resilience, and industrial might. Even in victory, the Hellcat's story was not over. Its influence continued to ripple outward in the decades that followed, shaping the future of naval aviation, inspiring generations of pilots and engineers, and reminding the world of what is possible when a nation commits itself fully to a cause. The Hellcat was more than just a fighter plane. It was a force of history, a machine that changed the course of a global conflict and left a legacy that endures to this day. In the end, the story of the Grumman F6F Hellcat is not just the story of a fighter plane. It is the story of how a single machine can embody the character, determination, and ingenuity of an entire nation at war. It is the story of how innovation and necessity, when fused with courage and resolve, can create a weapon that not only changes battles but reshapes the course of history. And above all, it is the story of how thousands of ordinary people, engineers, pilots, factory workers, mechanics, strategists, came together to achieve something extraordinary. What makes the Hellcat's legacy so enduring is that it was more than just a technical achievement. It was a solution, a response to a dire need, a weapon born from urgency and forged in the fires of adversity. When the United States entered the Pacific War, it faced an opponent that had spent years preparing for conflict. Japan's air power was dominant, its pilots highly trained, and its aircraft, especially the Mitsubishi A6M-0, among the most advanced in the world. The early years of the war were a sobering lesson for the U.S. Navy, which struggled to match Japan's aerial prowess. But America did what America does best. It adapted, innovated, and outproduced. And the Hellcat was the embodiment of that transformation. The F6F's success also highlights a truth that extends far beyond the battlefield. The best solutions are often those that balance performance, reliability, and practicality. The Hellcat was not the most glamorous aircraft of the war, nor was it the most advanced. But it was precisely what the situation demanded: powerful enough to outfight the enemy, rugged enough to survive battle damage, simple enough to produce in huge numbers, and forgiving enough for inexperienced pilots to master. This balance made it the perfect weapon for the Pacific War, and it's a lesson that continues to resonate in military design, engineering, and strategic thinking today. It also stands as a testament to the power of human ingenuity under pressure. The men and women who built the Hellcat did so under immense constraints, limited time, scarce resources, and the ever-present urgency of a global conflict. Yet they produced an aircraft that exceeded every expectation and became a cornerstone of Allied victory. Their achievement reminds us that adversity can be a powerful catalyst for innovation, pushing humanity to accomplish things that might have seemed impossible under less dire circumstances. The Hellcat's legacy also lives on through the people whose lives it touched. Many of the pilots who flew the F6F went on to become leaders in aviation, space exploration, and military strategy. Their experiences in the cockpit, their split-second decisions, their moments of fear and triumph, their reliance on a machine that became an extension of themselves, shaped their perspectives and their careers. The Hellcat taught them lessons about discipline, teamwork, adaptability, and courage that extended far beyond the skies of the Pacific. And for the countless sailors and soldiers whose lives were saved because the Hellcat controlled the air above them, its impact was immeasurable. Every amphibious landing that succeeded without devastating air attacks, every convoy that reached its destination unscathed, every bomber that made it home from a mission, all of these were, in part, the result of the Hellcat's unyielding presence. Its contribution to victory was not measured only in dogfights won or enemy planes destroyed, but in the countless lives it protected and the strategic opportunities it created. Today, more than 8 decades after its first flight, the Hellcat remains one of the most celebrated fighter aircraft in history. It is a fixture at air museums around the world, lovingly restored and maintained by dedicated enthusiasts who see it not just as a machine, but as a living piece of history. When a Hellcat takes to the sky at an air show, its massive engine roaring and its broad wings gleaming in the sun, it is more than a nostalgic display. It is a visceral reminder of a time when the fate of the world was decided in battles fought thousands of feet above the ocean. Its legacy is also preserved in the doctrines and strategies of modern naval aviation. Every carrier fighter that launches into the sky today, whether it's a supersonic FA-18 Hornet, a stealthy F-35C Lightning II, or any future aircraft yet to be imagined, owes something to the lessons first learned with the Hellcat. The emphasis on versatility, survivability, and pilot-centered design that define the F6F continues to guide the development of new aircraft. Its spirit lives on in every deck crew that prepares a fighter for launch, every pilot who straps into a cockpit, and every mission that relies on air. Superiority for success. But perhaps the most profound lesson of the Hellcat story is one of perspective. It reminds us that history is often shaped not by the most advanced or glamorous creations, but by those that simply do their job exceptionally well. The F6F Hellcat was not a marvel of cutting-edge technology. It did not break speed records or push the boundaries of aerodynamics. What it did was far more important. It fulfilled its mission with unmatched effectiveness, reliability, and consistency. It gave the United States the tool it needed to seize control of the skies, and in doing so, it helped change the course of the war. And that is why, decades later, the Hellcat continues to inspire awe and admiration. It is a reminder that victory is built not just on brilliance, but on perseverance. That success often depends not on the spectacular, but on the steadfast, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not the one that dazzles the imagination, but the one that simply works, again and again and again. The Grumman F6F Hellcat was such a weapon. It was the hammer that smashed Japan's aerial dominance. It was the shield that protected fleets and armies as they advanced across the Pacific. It was the sword that cut through enemy resistance and opened the skies to Allied victory. And in the end, it was more than a machine. It was a symbol of everything that made victory possible: courage, innovation, teamwork, determination, and the unwavering belief that freedom was worth fighting for. As the last echoes of World War II fade into history and the generations who lived through it pass into memory, the Hellcat story endures, not just in museums or history books, but in the lessons it teaches and the legacy it leaves behind. It stands as a tribute to the men and women who built it, flew it, and trusted it with their lives. And it stands as a timeless reminder of a simple but powerful truth: that when humanity is united by purpose, when ingenuity is harnessed to necessity, and when courage is matched by capability, there is no challenge too great, no enemy too formidable, and no sky too high to conquer.